Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. It's technically still afternoon during finals. If we haven't met before, my name is Mandy, and I'm the coordinator of undergraduate research, scholarly, and artistic work. And I'm so excited to be joined today by Brett Christoph. Do you want to just introduce yourself, Brett?
Yeah, I sure can. So I'm Brett Christoph. I work as an experiential learning coordinator for the Office of Career Services, which means I get to support student learning outside of the classroom and in preparation for the world of work. So what you guys have to look forward to after you finish your degree. So I get to coordinate with Mandy and other folks on campus, different opportunities to help students develop skills, including communication skills, networking, problem solving, and getting them opportunities that can help build your professional skills and help you get prepared for the world of work. So really excited to be here and to present with Mandy.
Thanks so much, Brett. And today we are talking to you about how to talk to a professor about a research position, but really all of the skills that we're
Mhm.
outlining are skills that will work for any sort of job or any type of sort of future opportunity, whether that's sort of grad school, careers, volunteering,
Yep.
very applicable skills.
Mhm.
So to start us off, I do like to just begin with a bit of a territory acknowledgement, to acknowledge that we're gathering here today on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis, and to pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with each other. Um, I think when it comes to thinking about research, the undergraduate research initiative, thinking about our commitment to reconciliation, whether that's in our research, scholarly, or artistic work, but also in the sessions that we do. To me, that means being willing to not just learn, but sometimes to relearn, to support work that is led by Indigenous peoples and communities, especially when we're thinking about that research, scholarly, and artistic work. So important that it be led by Indigenous peoples, and thinking about how our work can be beneficial and accessible to Indigenous communities and to all communities. So we have a packed hour for you today. I think it's going to be really exciting, and we're going to make you work. So if your brain is tired from studying and from exams, there's no marks for this. It's just meant to be helpful, and so you get something out of the session. So our first half is just sort of talking a bit about like what do we mean by research? What do we mean by research jobs or a job as a student assistant on campus? And how do you go about starting to find those jobs? And then part two, which is probably the more helpful part, is where we sort of break down our steps, research, prepare, email, and then meeting with someone, hopefully sort of like a job interview, and some of those next steps, so that you sort of get the step-by-step process of how to actually go about approaching a professor about a research position.
Mhm.
So what is a research position? And hopefully this is not coming as a surprise and we don't have an exodus of folks from our Zoom meeting. Um, I like this definition of research from Western Sydney University because it talks about research as being the creation of new knowledge or using existing knowledge in new and creative ways. And I like how sort of broad that definition of research is. And especially here at the U of S, when we're thinking about opportunities for students to do research, we're thinking about it in all disciplines, right? So it could be in engineering or in the sciences, but it could also be like in history or sociology or religious studies or education. And so if we think of research as being about like creating or reinterpreting knowledge, I think that can sort of really broaden it up. It's not just working in a lab. It's not just writing research papers. It's this really sort of broad area of work.
Mm.
And here at the U of S, there are what we call signature research areas. So there's all sorts of areas where professors and where students are doing research, but these are some of the areas where we're really a leader in terms of these fields. And so some of them I think maybe won't come as a surprise. Things like agriculture, things around sustainability, but there's a lot of work as well here at the U of S related to Indigenous peoples, related to health research, connected to the synchrotron. And it can be helpful to sort of think about what are our areas of expertise and sort of where we're really exceptional at the U of S are in terms of the research. especially if you're not quite sure what type of research you're interested in. So I think some of us have like really clear interests, maybe related, hopefully related to our degree that we're pursuing. But a lot of these signature research areas are very interdisciplinary. So it can be great, especially if you're not quite sure what you're interested in. This can be a good place to start
Mhm.
to find out what folks on campus are researching.
I think I shared in our last session, Mandy, that I have a friend who is, her background is in religion and culture studies, but she's actually doing work for the research for the College of Medicine. So just to highlight that interdisciplinary, those possibilities, right? So she's doing medicine or research for the College of Medicine and Community Health, looking at cultural factors and environmental factors in Indigenous communities in Saskatchewan. But her formal background is in religion and culture studies. So
That's so cool.
it is interesting, right? So you can see how there's overlap between, the sciences and then some those social sciences. So yeah, lots of intersections in the world of research.
Very cool. So this is not the best visual, but meant to sort of illustrate sort of that progression if especially if anyone on the call is interested in maybe a career as like a professor, sort of what that skill building degree progression is. So most of us on this call are undergraduate students. And if you are interested in research, there's sort of two paths during your undergraduate degree for those more formal research experiences. I want to provide them as often as possible, but some of the most sort of thorough, in-depth experiences are going to be working as a student assistant to a professor on their research project, or depending on what your degree is, some of our programs do have an honors thesis option or an honors project where you get to really do that in-depth research. And then, sort of, if you go into graduate studies, the next stage would be to become a master's student to do a master's degree. These can be project-based or thesis-based, depending, so different levels of how big your research project is if you have your own research project. And then from there, folks go into PhD programs if they want to continue with their studies. And typically it's having a PhD that is sort of the qualifying degree to become a professor at a university. And then even amongst professors, there are different ranks. We have associate, assistant, and full professors. And then we also at the university have something called research chairs, which are sort of professors that are really the top of their field conducting research, and their chair is usually in their area of expertise. So just sort of to map out where even if you're a student who hasn't experienced, had a research job before, or you haven't done an honors thesis, this is really where we start. And if you are considering graduate studies or you think you might want to become a professor, this is really the start of that path. However, the skills that we build working as a student assistant or in research are super applicable to any career path. So you might decide you want to work as a student assistant to get that research work experience. And that doesn't mean you have to go into graduate studies. The skills you'll build will benefit you in any career. Oops. Microsoft PowerPoint is not responding.
Oh,
Oh no, we might need Brett to share your screen.
I can.
Sorry,
Okay.
it might come back. Let
Yeah,
me see.
try it.
Present.
Do you want me to share?
Okay, I think I have it back.
Okay.
I'm just gonna see if it will let me share my screen again. Can you see my screen?
No.
Oh, I forgot to hit the share button again. There we go. Can you
There you
see it?
go. Now we can. Yep.
Yay! that horrifying moment of what
right?
is it
What if?
doing?
There we go. Back
Alrighty,
on track.
so now that we're back to why research now, and I think if you're on this, workshop at 4:30 during exam time, you probably have a pretty solid sense of motivation. And it's okay to be honest if that motivation is I need a summer job and this seems like it could be a good option for me. But beyond sort of just wanting a job, some benefits of sort of exploring these opportunities in your undergraduate degree are it can help you to understand the university in a different way, to understand what your professors do. Um, Again, that these skills you would build, even though they're research skills, are going to be applicable and beneficial for any career.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes I think students think that if they're not like that 97 student that I didn't even realize existed until I started this job, that people could have an average of 97, um, that you have to be that top student to do research. And I would disagree with that. I think a lot of the skills that make for a really strong researcher relate to like creativity and to
Yep.
communication. And that can be different than the skills that can cause you to be really successful, especially like in a first or a second year class where you're memorizing a lot of material. So they're a bit of a different skill set than you might be emphasizing in your classes, depending on your program. It's the best way to decide if you like research. So if you're at all considering graduate studies or a career in research, the sooner you can get some experience and see, is this something I like? I would say the better. And it's a great way to meet other students and professors on campus. So, working as a student assistant, that is just like this super broad name that we have for a bunch of very different jobs on campus. So, there are student assistants that do sort of any student job. Um, Today, we're specifically talking about student assistants that are working doing research, usually for a professor on one of their research projects. Sometimes, depending on the funding, the student will have more of their own project that the professor has created, but it's always going to relate to that professor's area of research and their expertise. These positions can be casual, they can be part-time, they can be full-time. Often during the summertime, students can have more full-time work. And then sometimes during the year, students, work like 6 or 10 hours a week. And where these students fall is under the university's non-union employees. So there is an agreement for that. Payment typically ranges for undergrad students between $14 an hour and $16.96, plus benefits. But if you want to sort of check out sort of what that agreement is, it would be the non-union employee agreement. So how do you find these jobs? And this is where we're going to lead into the focus of our presentation. Sometimes they're advertised. So I don't know, do you want to talk to this, Brett, about sort of where we advertise these jobs and how students can make the best use of these resources?
Sure, absolutely. So, one of the frustrating parts is that sometimes these are advertised and sometimes, usually, they are not. So that can be really frustrating because how do you find these opportunities if they're not advertised, right? So just under, we use a website at Career Services called Career Link. You can see that website. It's the second or the first one in that green rectangle. Um, and CareerLink is attached to your USask NSID email. So you can log on as a USask student and see where all the employers post jobs, they post events, there's workshops, there's all sorts of stuff there. But not often are there research positions there. Sometimes there might be, but typically what happens with research positions is they use word of mouth and
Mm-hmm.
referrals. So you have to, that's why this is you'll see that the approach that we are encouraging you to take with finding a professor to do research with is the same networking approach that we would encourage students who are trying to get a job in engineering or in
Mm-hmm.
agriculture, right? And we'll get there in a couple slides. So really, how you find these research positions is through your networks, is through
Mm-hmm.
getting involved in your department, getting involved with your professors, learning about their research, expressing interest, because most of the time, these professors want to hire students that they know are passionate about this area, that they know are good students that show up, that hand their assignments in. Mandy said, you don't have to be the top student of the class, but that consistency in showing up, that willingness to learn and to talk to them, those are all really good ways for you to kind of get on the radar of your professors, so that when there is a research position that pops up, they kind of go, oh, you know what, that one student in my class who's, at the front row every class, always has good questions, maybe they'd be interested in a research position. And often that's how students end up in a research position, is through just getting familiar with their professors, and then they get that kind of shoulder tap when the funding comes in. So I would encourage everybody to get on CareerLink to learn about other opportunities on campus. But in our next few slides, we're going to talk a little bit about how you start building those relationships on campus, so that you can get into that word of mouth kind of circle, where you can start getting these research positions that aren't necessarily advertised on something like CareerLink.
Exactly. And even sometimes I know right now my office is advertising. We have a call for students and faculty to apply for NSERC USRAs, which pay for summer research. But the first step of applying for that award is, as a student, you would have to go and find a professor who would be your supervisor and apply for that award with you. So sometimes we'll advertise funding opportunities, but you still have to go and talk to that professor. And it's really all about those relationships.
And you'll see that the skills we talk about here really can be for finding a supervisor, but also for finding just your first entry level job. So they're really transferable skills that will serve you kind of in whatever pursuits you're
Yeah,
after.
exactly. This isn't just about one thing. This is going to help with everything, right?
You got it.
Okay, so here's our 4 steps that are pretty general. And again, I think the same steps as for any job. So number 1, we're going to do our research to become researchers. And then number 2, we're going to do a lot of prep work. And part of that prep work is sort of that like internal and figuring out what you're looking for, what you want. And then part of it is actually preparing materials. And then number 3 for this sort of approach is we're going to recommend sort of that email to a professor where you make a request, express your interest, provide information. We've got all of the templates, and we'll do some practicing. And then ideally, hopefully, eventually, that will result in a meeting to discuss sort of what they're looking for, what you're looking for, that could lead to a position. But as Brett said, like, today we're really focusing on this sort of lead up to sending an email or asking someone directly about a job and then maybe meeting with them. And that's going to, no matter how it goes, I think benefit you and show your interest and your commitment that might pay off later on down the road if it doesn't right away. But moving forward, that networking, how you are in class, if there's department events or university events you can go to, they're all opportunities to get to know your professors and to sort of show your interest that could lead to a position as well down the road.
And just to point out before you switch slides, you want to go back. This is the same formula of advice I would give somebody who is going to a networking event or applying for a job that's not a research-based job, right? So it's the same approach, right? Doing a little background research, figuring out who you're meeting with, what the story is, so that you can have a really solid background, getting prepared, preparing your job search documents, preparing your own goals so you have a really good, clear sense of who you are and what your goals are, and then the emails and the follow-ups, which we'll get to. So really, these 2 pieces of research and preparation are really important for job search overall. And specifically today, we're going to talk about within research positions.
Awesome. Okay, and so now we're going to make you do work. Not hard work. It'll be good. So think about what your goals or interests are related to a research position. If you feel comfortable, it would be awesome if you could pop them into the chat. Or if you don't want to write them in the chat, just like write them on a sticky note or something, but just take a couple of minutes and think about what are your goals and interests in a research position.
And I would really encourage you to actually physically write them down, whether it's typed out on the chat or on a pen and paper. There is actually some evidence on how the actual process of physically writing down our thoughts helps us with our clarity, but also helps us actually achieve those goals or those outcomes, right? So thinking, oh, my goal is to go to the gym 3 times a week, right? I will have more luck with that goal if I actually write that down and kind of make it something that holds me accountable to this goal that I've set. So take a couple minutes here to think about who you are, your interests, and then your goals in a research capacity. And this is really helpful for it's kind of the background work for what we're going to do kind of in the next little bit of the session.
And there aren't any wrong answers.
No, it just helps us get a sense of who we are. Awesome.
That's great, Brianne.
Mm-hmm.
Or Brianna, sorry.
Yeah. And see, it's great because you have a very clear goal of, I want to know if I want to do that honors degree to continue kind of developing my skill in this area. And I'm interested in toxicology, health and wellness, right? The more specific and the more detailed you can get, the better, right? Because within toxicology, health and wellness, right, there's a lot of possibilities, right? But that's a really, really great kind of clear, we call that like an elevator pitch, where it's just your very brief summary of who you are and what your purpose is. So that when you're in a networking event or if you're walking down the hall with your professor after class, you only have, let's say, a minute to tell them who you are and what you're interested in, right? So having this kind of readily available, so you can say, my goal is actually to pursue an honors degree or a graduate degree, and I'm really interested in this area of toxicology. How great is that? Now they know who you are, they know your goals, so that when they have a conversation with somebody else, who knows, maybe they'll connect you with somebody who is, looking for a research assistant, right? So awesome, Brianna. That was a great start for us.
And great, Alexander. Anything politics or international relations?
Interesting. Mm-hmm. We're already getting into some of the disciplinary research kind of opportunities. So we've got like health, toxicology. We're also getting into international relations, political science as a research area. We've got some sociologists in the mix as well.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And this takes time too,
Yeah.
right? Like it's for us to say, like, just come up with this in a minute or two if you haven't thought about it, is a really hard request. Might be harder than questions on your final exams.
Computer scientists. So also really helpful to give the context too, right? For us, and we've just asked you to put in your interest, right? So of course, but something like, I'm a third year computer science student, and I'm really interested in learning more about NPL machine learning models. Right, so really gives you a strong kind of statement. Like, I'm a third year student, my name is Shivang, and I'm really interested in this area of computer science, right? Really, really clear, really direct, gives you a really kind of good picture of who this person is and what their interests are. It's also impressive when people can clearly articulate who they are and what they're interested in, right? Whenever I hear someone say, hey, this is me and I'm interested in this, even if it's not something I'm interested in, I'm usually like, that's really cool and like neat that you've articulated that.
Exactly. And one thing we chatted about earlier, Brett, is if you're telling a professor who has a similar research interest that you are also interested, or you find what they do interesting and exciting and share a similar interest, that's always fantastic, right? If you think about, when you meet someone and they have a common interest to you, it just makes for great conversation and helps
Yeah.
helps you to want to talk to them a bit more.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so our do your research phase. The first step is to really do your research internally, right? And to think about what are you interested in and what kind of position are you looking for, right? If, for instance, like Brianna, if you're thinking I might want to do an honors degree, maybe you're looking for a summer of full-time work to sort of test the waters of that type of research. That might be different than someone who's like, oh, I maybe want, to spend a couple of hours shadowing someone, right? Or volunteering. Or I want to work casually because I'm going to be away for the summer. So think about your interests, but also what type of research position you're looking for that you would have capacity for. Um, if you are able to, or if you know of any funding opportunities. So I am loving that this group has a lot of social scientists and humanists in it because I am a history person and I know Brett, religion and cultural studies. Um, but let's say you're a natural science person or an engineer, and you qualify for an NSERC USRA. That's great information to be sort of documenting as part of this research process, because then you want to think about those timelines in terms of when you're emailing this professor and what you're requesting of them. Um, Thinking about, again, depending on your time frame, are there any department events or presentations you can attend just to make it easier to get to know your profs, get to know the folks that you want to request to work with, and to get a better sense of what they do. I'm always going to recommend that you start with who you know. So
Hmm.
rather than starting with like, I just need to get my computer out and research every researcher on campus, start by thinking about who are the professors that you like, who are the professors whose research seems interesting to you. And those might be two different things, right? There
Hmm.
might be folks that you're like, oh, this is fascinating, or you seem like a great mentor that I could learn a lot from. Um, and sometimes it's great to, even if you don't know that you'd want to do research with a professor, but you have a good relationship with them and a good rapport, could you go and talk to them and ask their advice on who might be good for you to work with given your interests? So how can you sort of build on the relationships you already have,
Hmm.
to get their guidance on who might be a good fit for you?
And that's the great part about networking is once you connect with one person, then you are connected to whoever else they're connected with, right? So if you go to your professor that you have a relationship with, or they know you by name kind of already, maybe you're not interested in their research areas, but you go and you have a conversation and you tell them that you're interested in pursuing research. You tell them your research interests and your areas that you'd like to kind of pursue, and it might not align with theirs, but because they work within the department, they're going to know who their colleagues are and what research their colleagues are doing, right? So that's why you meet with one person and they might not, be accepting a student assistant. They might not have the funding. They might not be in your research area, but they might know that one person who they can connect you with, who, might have a research project that you could work on, right? So starting with who you know, helps it be less scary, helps it be a little bit more practical, right? But even if it's not a direct alignment, you're setting yourself up for being connected to another kind of set of networks, right? That who those professors know, right? So it's a really great place to start is with those professors that already know you or that you already kind of are familiar with.
And it's going to help you get your foot in the door, right?
Yeah.
Because it is absolutely okay to send someone a cold email, like to email someone you've never met before and introduce yourself and basically make this request. That is very
Mm-hmm.
typical for this type of job. However, if you can email someone who's going to recognize your name and be like, oh, great student, right? Or reliable student, or potentially be able to name drop a professor that they know who said, hey, so and so said to email you, it can just sort of increase, I think, your chances of getting the response that you're looking for. So, whether you know someone or not, we are going to recommend that you do a little bit of research into their research. So, whether that's a professor you've had class with or just a professor that's been suggested as, oh, they're the person who's, doing machine learning models, or they're the person who you really want to work with around human behavior and social constructs of society, right? Like who is that person? And then we're going to sort of look them up. their university profile and see what you can find out about their research in a bit more detail, see what you can find about what they're publishing. And sometimes on their website, they will include information about the process for if you are a student that wants to work with them. Not everyone does, but it's just really good to double check that. And then the other sort of great resource is the other students. So I love Alexander. You wrote here that you have a classmate who is a research assistant compiling news sources from developing countries. So that's just a great person to go and talk to about their experience, who they worked with, especially if you're interested in a similar type of position.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, we're going to practice. We'll see how the tech works here. Can you see the website, Brett?
We sure can, yep.
Alrighty. Okay, so this is where we need some input. What is an area of research? We've got a couple in the chat, but does anyone want to just pop one in for us to do as a group to see if we can find a supervisor?
Soil science, I don't know.
Soil science. This is not a plant. Global
No.
security. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Perfect.
So that political studies probably, hey?
Yeah.
See how bad I am at typing when people can see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to start by bringing up the Department of Political Studies. There might be other departments that we could look at. And then there's a couple of different parts. Every department webpage is slightly different just to make it extra fun for us. But I usually like to go to people. There we go. And then again, depending on the department, some will put a little blurb, which makes the step easier. But if they don't, you can just sort of click on a profile.
Click on Kristen Fisher.
Kristen
She
Fisher.
might have something right beside, yep, right, Kristen J. Fisher on the right side. Yeah,
Perfect.
she might have something to do with global security.
Yep.
Yeah, because I know she does work in international relations.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So usually you can sort of read about them, and people will usually in their About Me, if they have one, summarize their degrees. And then you can also pop on down to, there we go.
So now we see her research areas. If you go up a little bit though, I saw something about SHRC. There it is. Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. So she's had research. So she successfully is received SHRC funding, which is like the humanities social science version of NSERC. So she doesn't have anything explicitly saying I am accepting student assistance, but she does have a background in applying for SHRC funding, which tells you that she's worked with students, she's worked with SHRC. She might be somebody who's willing to have a conversation with a student who's interested in exploring this area, right? So she's, somebody you could reach out to and say, I see that you've successfully received SHRC funding in previous research projects. I'm hoping to apply for my own application coming up. Would you have a chance? Would you be willing to meet with me to let me ask you some questions?
Exactly. And SHRC right now does not have undergraduate student research awards.
Yeah.
I'm going to be terrible, Brett. They have one. If you are a Black student researcher, there is one SHRC for the U of S. But Brett is absolutely right. When you can see professors that they have grants, that also means they might have money to hire you too, right? Mm-hmm. It depends what they actively have. Also, if you're interested in graduate studies, again, a professor who's familiar with SHRC is going to be a perfect person to approach if their research interests align with yours.
Who was that other person we found on a whim that had they had the accepting student application?
Oh yeah, that was I might not be able to find that again. Every website is different though. Here, I'll even just bring up maybe USask and so political studies, you see how sort of theirs is laid out. So in the Department of Biochemistry, Microbiology, and Immunology, it's just laid out a bit different, but the same information is there, right? So if we scroll down, we can see sort of a general sort of like keywords of what different professors are studying. Um,
It was up a little bit.
Lyme disease, right?
Yeah, Carrie, not Carrie Lavender, up one more. This Carrie Colbrin. So you do have to be, it's like sleuthing. You have to go and do a little bit of behind the scenes Googling. So right here, you can see currently accepting applications for NSERC Undergraduate Student Research Award and honor students. So they're looking, well, that deadline passed. They're looking for somebody in the summer. So this is somebody who's very keen to support student learning in their lab or in their classroom, right? They've made it so clear that it's on their website. It's not always going to be so clear for everyone. This person is obviously likes to be on top of their student assistants and likes to, you know, be very strategic about that, which is awesome. It makes it very clear, but it's not always going to be so clear, right? So you might have to do a little bit of guesswork. But this is a really clear example that we found on Fluke last time we gave this workshop, where it was a really kind of very clearly labeled there that they're looking for NSERC undergraduate students. You also see they want to be contacted no later than December 24th, sorry. So they're wanting to kind of get this conversation rolling before the Christmas holiday break. And Mandy, you can speak to the timeline a little bit more if you'd like, but yeah.
Yeah, so NSERC USRA awards, again, if you're interested, I'll put the link in the website when I'm not showing you the website. But they are due at the end of January, so January 31st, and that's a funding opportunity where students apply with a professor, and where you have to sort of find your own supervisor. And so that's why this professor is saying, hey, if you want to work with me, let me know by this date. So that then would give you over a month to put in an application with her. Where it's helpful to see this is if there's a professor that you're like, oh, I think I'd like to work with them. It's even good just to check their website to see if they have any criteria like that of, hey, contact me about this, or I'm not taking undergrad students right now. Just double checking what they have on their website. But professors that don't say currently accepting applications for undergrad students, that doesn't mean that they aren't. It's more of an inconsistency in how we have our websites. So, for instance, if we go back to sort of that first professor we were looking at, whoops, if we go to Kristen's, she doesn't have that same like accepting undergrad students, but that doesn't mean she's not. It just means you have to sort of look at her research interests, send that email, and ask if she's accepting undergraduate students and ask about what her process would be.
So there's a bit of kind of sleuthing that you might have to do. But the other thing is once you're on this profile page, that's when you can start to learn a little bit about who these professors are, so that when you are reaching out, you can connect to their research and their interest areas, right? So with our other example, Carrie, he does research on Lyme disease, right? So maybe we had a student in our other session who was really interested in disease and microbiology and working in a lab to gain some skill there. Maybe she's not like really totally invested in Lyme disease. Maybe that's not her passion, but yet she knows that going into a lab where they study Lyme disease is going to be very, very helpful for the experience of going into another lab that might be studying, the COVID vaccines or the virus, right? So using that opportunity to get some research in this particular area that will hopefully open doors and will definitely open doors into other research opportunities, and the skills that they would build in the Lyme disease lab would be applicable in another context or another lab, right? And so the idea here is you've done a little research, you're thinking about reaching out to this professor before that December 24th date, and you're thinking about how you're going to connect with that professor.
Exactly. And depending on like, so let's say with your interests, if you end up being like, there's 10 professors or the whole department fits with my interests, then you might want to zoom in a little bit more specifically, to like what aspect of going from international relations into global security. Alexander is a great, zoom in step, right?
Mhm.
Or alternatively, sometimes we zoom in a little bit too much, or we need to sort of broaden it out a little bit. So maybe we don't have a professor that studies the exact disease we're interested in or the exact maybe country that we want to study, but they study a similar issue in a different country, right? Which might be for sort of where we're at, a great opportunity to sort of get that research experience.
I would
So
just like to
go ahead.
chime in really quickly just to address Shebang because we have to move on to some of our other slides, Shebang. But try this at home. It's quite easy. I just did it. All I did was searched up machine learning USASC. I found the machine learning course, which is Computer Science 423. And when you look at the course offering, it tells you who the instructor is. I'm then able to go search that person in and see his profile like we learned, able to see his research interests, right? And then I can go back to the computer science faculty page and find other researchers. So this is a practice that we're encouraging you guys to develop and to start doing at home. Takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of kind of you're like investigating and doing a little bit of snooping, but that's why this information is here, right? People put this information so that you can reach out to somebody who has a research interest that's similar to yours, right? And it's the same kind of process I would encourage you to do if you're applying for a job at a specific company, going and learning a little bit about the background of that company. Navigating the website, it can be a little confusing, but you can often find really interesting things there. And just demonstrating. So once you get into a conversation with this person, the fact that you did a little research will show because you will know things that you wouldn't have been able to know if you hadn't had done that research. So it's really going to show that you've put in effort to learn a thing or two or to learn a little bit about who they are, their research and interests. So it also goes a long way to just demonstrate that you are engaged with that person and you're willing to do a little bit of background work in to get more prepared. So it does demonstrate a really strong and committed individual if you've gone and done a little bit of this background research. So try it on your own. You might have to try a couple different combinations, like, right? So machine learning, I actually know of a professor in the math department that is does research on machine learning. So it might not necessarily be computer science, right? It's math that he's doing machine learning algorithms in the math department. So getting a little creative there sometimes might be necessary.
And such a good recommendation too, Brett, to just do USask in the topic, because
Yeah,
sometimes navigating our website can be
yeah. So for the
trickier.
machine learning shebang, I just did machine learning USask. I found the course, and then you can see who taught that course this last year.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfect. I will try that. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah. And like we said, you might have to if you don't find your person like right off the bat, you might have to think, okay, even for your global security one, Alexander, right? The Johnson Chamoya School of Public Policy is another area that might be doing research on global security and global governance, right? And would it necessarily be within the Department of Political Studies, right? So that's Johnson Shoyama School of Public Policy. That is here on USAS campus, but we just don't normally think about it it's a graduate school, right? So we don't think about it normally in our undergraduate years.
Great recommendation. And professors, right? Just because they don't teach undergraduate students doesn't mean that they can't potentially talk to you or that they aren't looking to hire students or recruit future grad students.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to move into our prepare phase. So you've done a lot of your research work, and the more research work you do, you don't want to dwell there too long. You don't want to sort of research until you don't do anything. But if you do enough research, the prepare stage is going to be a lot easier. Part of it is the basics of just wanting to make sure that your resume or your CV are up to date before we start reaching out to folks, because we want to be able to either attach that or to be prepared if they ask for that. Always picking the format that is the best for your level of experience and the position that you're applying for. So if this is your first time applying for a research position, you probably want to go more with a skill-based resume because you don't have any other research jobs to list. Oops. Where did I go? So you can do this in the chat or do this on your piece of paper. But some more preparation work that I think is helpful to do is to write about why you want to work with a particular professor or in a particular lab or a particular group. So going from taking, here's my goals and interests, to we found this professor that does something similar, to why I want to, how can we connect those two things to say, how does their specific research relate to your specific research? Or are there skills, sort of to the example we gave with maybe you're interested in disease, but not Lyme disease? Like what is the connection between your interests and what they're doing as a researcher? And great to just start like writing that out, mapping that out however you want to. And so you can pop that in the chat if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to. It's harder in the chat than it was on our cards when we did in person.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about is start to think very specifically about what type of position you're looking for, right? Are you looking, say, for a supervisor to apply for a USAS, an NSERC USRA with, or to apply for an award with? Or are you looking for full-time employment as a student assistant? Are you looking for part-time or casual work and you don't have time for full-time? That's a different ask. Are you maybe looking for someone to supervise an honors thesis or a master's degree or a PhD? Or do you just want volunteer experience or to shadow? And just taking that time to think about what is it that you want in advance before we start talking to folks or drafting emails. So just because we're moving along swiftly to cram this into an hour for your email, just sort of our general, flow chart for how this would work is start early. It can take time, especially if you're going to do a good email. Brett and I have some examples for you, and we can tell you that to craft a not great email takes a couple of minutes, and to craft an email that is more in line with what we're recommending you do, even for us, making a fake email took us like a solid 30 minutes. And we were just making things up, so it should have been quicker.
So the point is that this is challenging. It's hard and sometimes scary to write a good, compelling email. So, but don't let that steer you away from it. Just sit down and draft the email and just start working on it. We have some examples in a little template that you can follow along. But ultimately, we're here in solidarity to tell you that writing emails is hard. It's a skill. It gets easier the more you do it. So start practicing that draft. And ultimately, we want you to send it. So if it's not perfect, that's okay. We're going to give you some tips how to make it better. But we do want you to start kind of doing that research work so you can start drafting some of these emails that you might want to send to a professor whose research aligns with your interests.
Exactly. And if you are looking for summer work, this is really the time you want to start reaching out. Even thinking about that example of the professor who wants students to reach out to them by the 24th of December.
Yeah.
This is really sort of that optimal time. You still, I think, have time to do some of that research work and some of that prep work, which will make the email drafting easier. But you don't want to spend months doing that research and prep work. Context is also important. So everything we're going to suggest in our templates is if you don't know someone super well, if this is a professor where you've had loads of classes with them, they know you, they recognize you in the hallway, then this would be a strange approach to take. So just adapt the template for your own context. If you know someone well, a conversation in person might be more appropriate than drafting them a super formal request email. But you may still want to be prepared to send them that email that sort of outlines specifically what you're asking for. I know lots of times I'll have informal conversations with folks that I have a good relationship with, but they may still want that follow-up. Again, just repeating, thinking about who you already have relationships with, about your network, who could help you with making these connections, actually drafting the email, I probably should have added another box here of if you have time, have someone review that email because it's one of those really sort of professional emails. A second set of eyes is going to help. So someone reviews it, hit send. And then again, professors are busy. They are frantically marking right now. So they might not email back right away. I put in the slide, wait at least 48 hours. I should have said 2 business days. Probably realistically, I would give it a week. But depending on timelines, sometimes I think 2 business days you can send like a very polite follow-up. Especially if there is sort of a deadline coming for funding or something. But again, the earlier we can send it, the better. Expecting that sometimes I know I lose sight of emails and don't reply back, just so you're giving yourself that time for a gentle, polite follow-up. Okay, so we're going to practice. So give you time to read.
Yeah, take a look at this, and we want to know what your feedback is, what you would change, what is good about it, what's not so good. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Pop it in the chat.
Yeah, you can pop it in the chat, or you could unmute yourself if you feel brave enough.
As a hint, this email took us like a minute to write.
Hint meaning it's not the best email you could write. Do you guys think it's a good email? Could be more specific, yeah. So it starts off, I'll read it to you. Hello, I'm a third-year biology student looking for a summer research position. I'm wondering if you know of any research positions within the department. I'm wanting to apply for NSERC. Sincerely, Anita. So they haven't given us, all they've said is hello, right? There's no salutation. So we don't really know who this email is addressed to. It could be addressed to anybody. We know a little bit that this is a third-year student looking for a summer research position, but biology is a very big discipline. So what area of biology? Also, if I'm really passionate about my Lyme disease research and you say you're a bio student looking for summer research, I might not make that connection. I might not say, oh yeah, you could come do Lyme disease research, right? That's why that background kind of research that you include in your email makes a better email. Another thing we pointed out is that this comes from a Hotmail account. If you see on the top, it says Anita Career, who is our example person that we like to use. Anita Career at hotmail.com. So we really encourage students to use their USask email because that is a little check mark that shows us that you are a person that's emailing us from in the institution. You're not a scammer. When I see emails that come from Hotmail, I don't look at them through my USask email. So use your USask email. It's how we kind of vet a person in the institution, right? We'll talk a little bit about managing your USask email. I know some students don't like their NSID, like the 3 letters and their 3 numbers, because it means nothing to them. But you can actually change that. So we'll talk about that in a little bit to see our next example. So this is example number 2.
Any thoughts on this one? And we've got like 5 minutes left, so
we're flying through these, yeah.
Flying through them. So this one has a bit more detail. It says there's a salutation that's a bit more detailed. It is coming from a USask email. It sort of connects the student to that professor's class. But we still think this could be a bit more specific, right? So the student's saying, I love science and have a passion for research, but it's not clear, why they're writing to this professor.
Or why they're passionate about research. What is it that you're passionate about for research? And what do you love about science, right? So right away, there's 2 opportunities to be a bit more specific there.
Exactly. And little things like you want to be quite formal in these emails, especially if you don't know the person well. So you would say, Dear Professor, and include their name, right? So, Dear Professor Brown, right? Or Dear Professor. professor career.
I think our next example, there we go. Yeah. So dear Professor Gray, how are you? I am a student in your bio 317 Fundamentals of Animal Physiology class. I'm very interested to learn about the research you do at Gray Lab. Especially, your research on pesticides and the impact on insect behavior. So right away, really specific. You can also tell that we've done a little bit of research here to know what goes on in Gray Lab. I'm interested in applying for NSERC USRA funding for summer 2024. Sorry, the font is so small, I'm like struggling to read just a little bit. And continuing to build my research skills in this area of study. I'm wondering if you're accepting new student assistants in your lab and if you might be interested in meeting with me to discuss potentially being my research supervisor. Would you have time in the next weeks to meet before the NSERC deadline at the end of January? Attached is a copy of my updated resume for you to review. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. Sincerely, Anita Career. And then you have her signature, which says, you know, what year of study she is, her contact information.
Exactly. And one thing that we really like about this example is in the last example, the student just said, will you be my supervisor? And that's sort of a hard question to answer based on one email without a lot of context. So what the second email does better is it makes the big ask clear. Like I'm interested in sort of working with you as a supervisor, but it makes the immediate ask a lot more reasonable, right? Can I meet with you?
Yeah, so you're just setting up that initial meeting to then continue this decision making of, you know, becoming a research assistant. Yeah, so it's a good point, Mandy.
So here's our template, and we will email the slides to you. Really sort of wanting to make sure you have a subject line, that you call the professor by their name, that intro and context piece, as well as the why with quite a bit of detail, and the ask. And we even sort of write out, you know, that you want to be direct about what your big ask is. You don't want to just say, I'm interested in research. You want to be clear, like I'm asking for a full-time, you know, work as a student assistant, or I'm asking about applying for this award. But the next step you request is best if that is a meeting, because it just makes it a lot easier for the professor than that you're asking them to make this huge decision without a lot of information. And then making sure you have a salutation and an email signature.
So here's where we were just talking about NSID. So always use your NSID at usas.ca email. It shows that you're a real person. And consider adding an email signature, which is your name, your year of study, your department, and your contact information. I have an example, I think, on the next slide. This is a student who emailed me. He's in my mentorship program. And I was just so impressed to see this very, very professional and polished email signature from a second-year mechanical engineering student. He's linked to his LinkedIn account. He's gone on and included all the proper communications information that the University of Saskatchewan has. So what you can do if you're wanting to make a lovely email signature like this, is you could have one basic like Anita Careers. If you go back, Mandy. So Anita Careers, you see a third-year sociology student, University of Saskatchewan, her email. That's fine. I think that's a great signature. This next one is really, really very professional. So that's kind of like he's gone above and beyond. So what you can do though, if you want to access like the USAC logo that he's included in his email signature, you just go onto pause, you search up marketing and communication, and then you can access kind of all the templates that the university has. And then, Mandy, if you go to the next slide, I'll explain that one. So you can create what's called an alias. So see here on you're on pause, you go to your profile just underneath your name, and then you go to your USAF email tab. You can see that my original NSID is BDK628. But that means nothing to you or to me. I mean, it is my initials, but so I've changed this to my alias, which is brett.christoph@usas.ca. And you can do that too. So you just go on and you just create an alias, and then that becomes your new email. And then emails that are sent to your NSID or your alias will all end up in your inbox. So it doesn't matter which email people use, it all goes to the same account. So that's a really good option for students, because I know some of you don't really know what your NSID is or really remember it. So this is a good way to make it more personalized for you, and that you can start using your USAF email.
Awesome. And so those are easy things too that you can do like right away that just
Mhm,
automatically make things a bit more professional and help you to
mhm,
get noticed, right? Especially if professors get requests from multiple students. If you're the student that has that very professional email with a more specific ask, um, it makes sense that they would be more likely to follow up with you than someone who just says, "Hey, professor, I'm looking for a job."
mhm,
So the extra effort I think can pay off.
mhm,
So this is just like a little flow chart to show sort of some of the possibilities, right? You might email a professor, and it's very possible they might say, "Hey, I'm not taking new students." Depending on that context, you might be able to follow up with them and say, "Hey, do you know of any other professors in the department or in this research area that are?" And then you want to sort of go back to doing your research, or if you found a couple professors that were options, going back to that sort of emailing phase. If you don't hear from them, probably for a week, if it's tight with the deadline, 2 business days, sending that polite follow up. But then there's also that chance you're going to say, "Hey, yes, I can meet with you." And that's where, because you've already done your prep work, you should be in a pretty good space where you could meet with them without a lot of notice because you've done your preparation. But you still want to maybe do a bit more prep if you are anxious about meeting, maybe, write out some questions you have for them or, practice your elevator pitch. Be professional. You want to, I probably wouldn't, for meeting a professor, wear like a total suit and heels, because we're not quite that businessy on campus, but you also probably don't want to show up in sweatpants, right? So be professional, be sort of your best self. And then during the meeting, be honest, be confident, and be direct. You want to, this is their chance to get to know you, but also your chance to get to know them and to understand what it would be like to work with them. And sometimes professors might say, "Hey, yes, I will apply for this award with you." But then you might need to understand, if I do not get that funding, would you still hire me, right? Or do I need to find another job? Just so you can make really informed decisions, and make sure that you have employment for the summer if that is something that you need. So it can mean needing to just ask very direct questions to make sure you understand what would happen if you don't get the funding, if that's the way you're going. Typically, I think professors would say, "Yeah, like it depends on if you get the award, or yes, I'll hire you no matter what. I've got loads of funding maybe and can want you as my assistant." Or they might not be able to offer you a position. And again, that doesn't mean that you're not a great student or that you don't have great potential. But it does mean that you might have to go back through this process or approach someone else, or maybe that next year is going to be the year
mhm.
where someone does have that funding and things work out for this type of job
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mandy, that we talked quite a bit about in our last session. Is just that sometimes this is a longer term investment, right? The work you do right now might not pay off next week or next month, right? This might be setting some relationship building so that next year you can secure that internship or that research position, right? So a lot of times it's a process that we're doing bit by bit so that in the future it pays off for us.
Exactly. And that's where, if you are that like really professional, student, that's going to keep those doors open even if it doesn't work this year, right? Whereas
Yeah.
in contrast, if you end up, being angry or frustrated or pushy, if someone says, "I'm sorry, I don't have a position for you," then that could actually sort of not help that relationship or that
Mhm.
connection to grow in the future.
Mhm.
So let's say they do say, "Okay, yes, I have a position for you in my lab." You still have a decision to be made, right? Is this position a good fit for you? And balancing, sometimes your first research position might not be your dream research position, right? It might include not the most exciting tasks because you're building your experience. And so really balancing, if I think you don't feel safe, if you don't feel respected, I would never recommend that you go and work for someone. But if you do feel like that would be good and that they would be a good mentor, but maybe the work might be a little bit boring, that could actually still be a really great entry
Mhm.
job or position to get your research experience.
Mhm.
And sometimes it takes time to figure out, what is a red flag versus what is maybe I feel nervous or this is scary or this isn't quite what I was hoping for. Um, and that is also a skill to learn how to figure out.
Yeah, it's important to do things even if we get a little bit nervous about them or a little bit uncomfortable, but we also don't want to be doing anything unsafe or putting ourselves at risk or in an unhealthy kind of working situation. So it's something that we learn over time. And so something that Amanda and I want to point out to you that it's something that, you don't always have to say yes, even if if we really want this opportunity, right? If there's something that makes you uncomfortable, find someone who you can talk to that's safe, that can help give you maybe some advice on what to do.
Exactly. Or it even might just be that the job doesn't work for you, right? Like if the
Mm-hmm.
job is you need to be in a lab from this time to this time and you're not available from those times, and that just might not be the right fit, right? Or if the job needs you to travel or something. So it's just making sure you understand and that it's something that is doable, and of course that you feel safe and good about it, even if it might not be the dream first job.
And it probably won't be.
And then your next steps, keep applying for jobs, right? And again, I think this is advice that you give Brett, no matter what job, is you don't just want to put everything into one potential opportunity. Maybe you wouldn't want to write to like 50 professors or write to every professor on campus, but
But your
maybe
top
there are.
three, your top two or three, yeah.
Exactly. So that you're not just sort of stuck in, oh, it took me like 3 weeks to get a meeting with this person and then it didn't work out. And now I have to go back to the drawing board, go back to square one, and I don't have time. So that's where it can be strategic to reach out to, 2 or 3 that you think might be a good fit for you. And that respectful persistence is being important. Networking is about the long game. And again, that if you aren't successful this year, you're still going to be successful, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you're building those relationships, you're letting professors know that you're interested. That can only
Mm-hmm.
benefit you, really.
Right.
And you can also always ask for feedback too, right? And that can be part of building those good relationships with your professors, is asking for their advice and for their feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So we have additional links and resources, but I think really the best resource, and I'll send you these slides so you don't have to be like, oh, I didn't see the links, is career services is just such a fantastic resource. And I know some of you on this call already know that, but just so many resources to help you get your resume or your CV prepared, to help with practicing, and to give you that support and that guidance to build what really are skills, to help you to go and talk to a professor and to help you to get some of these entry level research positions.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mandy.
And then you can also email me, really only about jobs related to research because I'm not a career expert. But if you are, for instance, interested in some of the awards that I've mentioned, or want sort of more advice about working with a professor for that research position, then you can definitely reach out to me. Sign up for our newsletter so we share information, and love to do sessions like this with Brett to help make sure students know that this is something that you can do, because you're not going to get a research job if you don't even know that those jobs exist. And you're not going to email someone if you don't know that that's the process. So we just want to make
Yeah.
sure that as many students as possible are aware of those opportunities, and that even if it's a little bit scary sometimes to email someone and say, put yourself out there and say, hey, I'm interested in this, that is very typical for these types of positions.
Yeah, quite normal. And I think we pointed this out last time, but your professors likely started on this journey in a very similar capacity. They likely had to do this kind of initial relationship building with a professor when they were in their undergraduate years, and had to go through learn the process the way that you are too. So that's to say, they're people too. They've been on this journey. And if you can demonstrate an interest in what they're interested in, that's the best way to kind of build a relationship, and to kind of make something happen for your future, right? So I think it's a really good practice for you, and also, like we pointed out, applicable for research positions, but then also for jobs outside of that research kind of umbrella. Yeah.
Exactly. So I know we went over our time a bit, But I'm just going to stop the recording. Thank you so much for joining us. But if you would like to, if anyone has questions, Brett and I are happy to stay on and answer your questions.